So Bernie Sanders getting a lot of grief because he did an interview with the New York Daily News, and they asked him a lot of questions about bank reform, and they said he didn't know what he was talking about. So everybody keeps reporting that story, except he did know what he was talking about. You've heard the story that he doesn't know what he's talking about. We've all heard that story. Front page of the New York Daily. We all know this, right? It's being repeated over and over in the media. What's not being repeated is that stupid story from the New York Times, New York Daily News, has been debunked. In fact, here's from the Huffington Post. In the Huffington Post, it says, in several instances, it's the Daily News editors who are bungling the facts in an interview designed to show that Sanders doesn't understand the fine points of policy. In questions about breaking up big banks, the powers of the Treasury Department, and drone strikes, the editors were simply wrong on the details. There's more. As the interview went on, though, it began to appear that the Daily News editors didn't understand the difference between the Treasury Department and the Federal Reserve. Following the transcript, so they show how, here's some more. The Daily News, switching to this is from them directly. They said to Bernie Sanders, switching to the financial sector to Wall Street, speaking broadly, you said that within the first 100 days of your administration, you'd be drawing up, your Treasury Department would be drawing up a too-big-to-fail list. Would you expect that that's essentially the list that already exists under Dodd-Frank, under the Financial Stability Oversight Act? That's their question. Here's what the New York Times says about that question. The Daily News may be referring here to the contents of Mr. Sanders' bill. Bernie Sanders introduced legislation last year that would effectively break up the banks. So this is what they're talking about. The legislation says that in no more than 90 days, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, a high-level regulator set up by Dodd-Frank Act of 2010, so inside Dodd-Frank, it sets up the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and they would have to draw up a list of firms that appear too big to fail. And then steps would be taken to break them up. So under Dodd-Frank, there's already this stuff, the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and Sanders' legislation would have given that board 90 days to come up with a list of banks that are too big to fail, and then they would take steps to break them up. Here's one more thing from the New York Times. In the interview, the Daily News editorial board, Mr. Sanders does appear to get tangled up in some details and lacks clarity. Breaking up the banks would involve arcane and complex regulatory moves that can trip up any banking policy wonk. Let alone a presidential candidate. But, taken as a whole, Mr. Sanders' answers seem to make sense. Crucially, his answers mostly track with a reasonably straightforward breakup plan that he introduced to Congress last year. So that's from the Huffington Post debunking it. We also have the New York Times debunking it, saying Sanders exactly knows what he's talking about. In fact, he introduced legislation to take care of this stuff, but that's not the story that's being repeated in the news. The story that's being repeated in the news is the other one. Here's CNN. Carol Costello is interviewing a Sanders supporter, and she says all this garbage at the top of her interview. Here we go.
Sanders may have the momentum, but he may have more to worry about, when Clinton goes on the attack. And I'm talking about this Daily News article.
First of all, it starts out with that BS meme of, Sanders hasn't faced an attack yet. Mm-hmm. Except every news outlet in the country for a year has been saying how this guy can't get elected, he's horrible, and he's a socialist. Except every news media outlet in the country.
Wait. Momentum, anytime you hear a journalist say momentum, it's bullshit.
Oh, yeah?
Momentum has been statistically disproven.
Oh, really?
It's just something that journalists will say, and it's a tip-off that they're just interested in creating a story and creating drama. So momentum is just one of those hooks that they say, like, he has some momentum going. It doesn't. Okay. That's all BS.
That being said, Bernie has the momentum.
He does not.
All right, here we got more to say.
It came down hard on Sanders, and this is 2 weeks before the New York primary. You see the headline there, Bernie's Sandy Hook shame, and that's not all. In a series of articles, Sanders upset gun control advocates by saying gun manufacturers are not liable for gun deaths. He told editors he hadn't thought about where to imprison ISIS terrorists if we closed Guantanamo Bay, and he was unable to articulate a plan to dismantle big banks. And I want to read the exact quote on that one. Here it is. So the Daily News asked Sanders, how do do you go about breaking up the big banks?
First of all, she just made three accusations about Bernie Sanders. She's only going to zero in on, let this woman answer back to one of them. Did you notice that? She made three accusations about what do you do with Guantanamo Bay prisoners? What was the other one? Drone strikes?
No, it's Guantanamo.
Oh, no, the Sandy Hook gun thing, Guantanamo Bay. And now she goes to the banks. She doesn't give this woman a chance to answer those two accusations, just the bank one. And let's go to the bank one.
Mr. Sanders, how do you go about doing it is having legislation passed or giving the authority to the Secretary of the Treasury to determine under Dodd-Frank that these banks are dangerous to the economy over the problem of too big to fail. The Daily News followed that answer up by asking this: do you think that the Fed has the authority to break up the big banks? Sanders said, well, I don't know if the Fed has that authority. Nomiki, shouldn't Sanders know that?
You have to finish what he said.
She doesn't finish what he said.
So she's setting him up. So she's creating drama. So she's not a good journalist.
Right. And by the way, it's several steps in process. That first you have to, under the Dodd-Frank, the Treasury Department runs a stress test. They come up with a list of banks. You have to have legislation to do this because this hasn't been done since the 30s. So that's why you have to do this, right? So that's why it's complicated. Bernie Sanders had to introduce legislation to make this happen. There isn't legislation enough right now.
No. This is worse. Dodd-Frank gives Congress and the Treasury the authority to do this. Congress has consistently taken that authority out. What he did was introduce legislation to
compel them to do what is laid out in Dodd-Frank. That's what you're saying. Yes. So again, this is all the stuff that we've figured out in just a couple hours after hearing about this story. Carol Costello has the resources of CNN News. She doesn't know any of this stuff. She doesn't understand. Go ahead, Robert.
By the way, I don't know if it played properly, but she mentions that the New York Daily News is a tabloid. She says, I'm quoting from a tabloid. So it drives me crazy when you say, like, I know that the New York Daily News is not good journalism. I'm going to use it as ammunition in a report. That's like saying, like, I actually know my shoe shine boy is a liar, but he gave me a hot tip, and I'm gonna repeat it.
I'm gonna repeat it on my news show.
And she started by acknowledging that it was a Clinton attack. That's what she said. That's what she started. If you play from the very beginning, Bernie hasn't faced a Clinton attack. I'm referring to the New York Daily News piece.
Here's an attack.
Let's repeat everything in it. It's like
and let's repeat every attack exactly. So, but we got to get to this because there's a lot more to it. So here's the Bernie Sanders supporter. She has a great comeback. Listen to what she has to say.
Well, actually, there's great fact-checking done on this in the New York Times, which I hold as a higher standard of a paper. I don't know about the rest of you guys. In New York, I think most New Yorkers hold the New York Times a little bit higher than the Daily News and the New York Post.
So she's sticking it to Carol Costello. I don't know if you know, New Yorkers don't really think the New York Daily News is that good of a news. We look more at the New York Times. So just so you know, you're quoting a rag. You're not really quoting the respected newspaper in New York. So that's what you're doing, Carol Costello, and she just let her know that.
They fact-checked this, and they basically said that he was right on this. The point, if you read the entire transcript, which is very long, it took about 45 minutes to read, he went into detail about how the determination of how to break up the big banks lies within Congress or the president, and the president gives authority to the Fed. Now, these are very arcane rules. This hasn't happened in many, many years. And he goes into detail about how they would have to come up with a better way of doing so. The problem is we take, as we do in the media, take little bits out of context and don't show the full picture. And to be clear, to be even more fair, Bernie Sanders is the only senator who brought this up in Congress. I know, but it's a much larger quote. He went into more detail at other points in the transcripts. But he also is the only...
So she just said, I just quoted it. Yeah, but you didn't quote the rest of his answer, which goes on to explain it.
Smug look on her face.
Yes, hang on, there's more to this.
Of Congress who's brought this up as legislation just last year. And you know what? The Daily News didn't talk about that, but the New York Times did. So I encourage everybody to go to the New York Times and read that article, and it'll go more into detail about not just his record, but what he was trying to say there. And he was being very fair, unlike a lot of politicians who go in and lie.
Okay, so that's a great answer. She laid it out to you, and she told you ahead that the president and he gave legislation last year that would deal with this stuff. And the president has to give the authority to the It's complicated. Even like the New York Times said, even policy wonks get caught up in this stuff. So it's complicated, but there's people, you'll figure it out how to do it. You have the policy, she lays it out to her, explains to her that the thing you're quoting is not a respected newspaper. It's already been debunked by the good newspaper in New York, yet you're still repeating it, Carol. You're still repeating it here. She just told you it's already been debunked. And then here's what Carol Costello's response to that is.
Well, I will say that there's something about offering a simpler explanation, like just give me your plan of how you're going to do it.
He just gave you the plan, you knucklehead. She just told you what the plan was, and she's like, "Hey, I'm a news person. Can you dumb it down?
Can I have more of a Trump answer?
Can you give me a Trump answer to this, really? Because you're talking policy, and I'm only a news person that hosts a news show, and I only have the resources of CNN. I could get anybody in there to explain this to me that I want, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to stay uninformed and keep misinforming our viewers because I'm lazy and I'm a corporate journalist and I don't really do my job. I'm repeating already debunked stuff from the New York Daily News right now. Right now I'm doing that. This goes on. There's more to say.
Leave it there. Don't tell me what can't be done and what laws have to be passed and blah, blah, blah.
So that's a news. Listen to what just happened.
Don't tell me information and facts.
That's a news person who just dismissed serious policy discussion as blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah, sure, he can explain blah. So she's saying he doesn't understand what's going on. Then this woman says, no, he explains it. In fact, he has legislation. And she goes, blah, blah, blah. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say Bernie doesn't know what he's talking about. And then when you explain he does, she goes, that's too complicated. Now I'm a dummy. That's literally what's happening right here on CNN. And remember, one of the N stands for news. The other N stands for not.
That encapsulates everything that is wrong with American news right there. That moment, that woman is supposedly a journalist.
Supposedly.
And she said, look, you're not giving me the sound bite I want. You're not giving me the entertainment factor I want. You're trying to explain the nuances and complexities of policy making to the American public, and I won't have it.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Robert. You are exactly. That is laughable. I mean, but that happens every day. She's just told you're repeating already debunked information, and she comes back with blah blah blah.
Yeah, this lady's pushing back against the propaganda she's spewing, and it's causing her brain to malfunction.
Yes,
this is the first time in a long time. I'm gonna put her lower on my list than Don Lemon. That's how bad that is.
That's how bad that. Oh, because she's been told in real time what you're doing is forwarding already debunked BS, and she doesn't go, oh really? Let's take a break and let me come back. I have to check this out. This has been debunked already. Let's take a break, and let me get my producer on the line who let me come on air with this BS information, and someone's getting fired. That didn't happen. She just got blah 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 blah.